"You don't belong here." That's what the flight attendant said, right before she blocked a 10-year-old black girl from stepping into first class. What she didn't know was that little girl's uncle had just bought 52% of the airline. And her job? About to vanish mid-air. The airport was alive with early morning motion. Suitcases rolled, coffee steamed, voices rose and fell like waves. But in the midst of all that noise, Naomi Pierce stood quietly by gate B-17, clutching her navy blue backpack and a freshly printed first-class boarding pass. She looked small next to the towering gate signs and tall adults around her, but she carried herself with quiet confidence. Her dark curls were pulled back neatly. Her shoes were polished. Her outfit, a soft cardigan and a blue dress, had been picked out the night before with help from her uncle. "Travel prepared, look respectful, speak clearly," he had reminded her. "But never let anyone tell you where you do or don't belong." She repeated those words in her head as the gate agent announced, "Group 1, now boarding, first class." Her heart fluttered. She stepped forward, boarding pass in hand. First class, her first time. A gift from her uncle, Gregory Pierce. She'd memorized her seat, 2A. She couldn't wait to settle in by the window, open her sketch pad, and maybe even sip one of those little apple juices they served in glass. Naomi waited her turn behind a tall man in a gray suit. The woman at the gate, Claudia Heller, her nameplate said, was scanning boarding passes with a professional smile. But when Naomi stepped up, something changed. Claudia looked down at the pass, then up at Naomi, then back down again. Her brow furrowed, just slightly, but enough. Naomi offered a polite, "Good morning." Claudia didn't respond. Instead, her voice dropped half an octave. "Sweetheart, where are your parents?" Naomi blinked. "My uncle booked the flight. I'm traveling alone. I'm in first class." Claudia's eyes narrowed like Naomi had just said something outrageous. "Are you sure?" Naomi lifted the boarding pass slightly higher. "Yes, ma'am. Seat 2A." Claudia gave a short breath of air, half chuckle, half disbelief. "That's first class." "I know." "Well," Claudia said with a tight professional smile, "let's get this cleared up. First class is for our paying customers." Naomi paused. "My uncle paid for my seat." Now other passengers in line were beginning to glance over. A woman in heels looked up from her phone. An older man frowned slightly. Still holding her ticket, Naomi tried again. "I have the pass. It says 2A." But Claudia stepped closer, her voice low and sharp. "Look, I don't want to make a scene, but you clearly don't belong up here. Don't push it." The words hit like a slap. Naomi froze. Behind her, someone muttered impatiently. The line shifted. A few heads turned. A younger gate attendant peeked over. "Everything okay?" Claudia turned quickly. "Yes, just a mix-up. We're handling it." Then, without even checking the ticket again, Claudia pointed toward the general boarding area. "Go ahead and take a seat in economy. They'll help you there." Naomi's heart pounded. She didn't argue, didn't cry. She just stepped to the side and let the line move past her. People gave her glances, some curious, some indifferent. No one said anything. She stood off to the side for a moment, her small fingers gripping the boarding pass so tight it started to crease. Then, quietly, she walked back toward the general boarding area. The shame pressed on her like a weight. Her uncle had told her she belonged there, but the woman at the gate didn't even bother to check. Inside the plane, Naomi found herself seated in 27B, rowed in between a window stranger and a magazine reader. Her feet barely touched the floor. She tucked her backpack under the seat and sat stiffly upright, staring at the boarding pass still in her hand. She hadn't done anything wrong, so why did it feel like she had? Meanwhile, just a few cabins ahead, hidden behind a partition labeled Private Business Traveler Section, a man in a dark navy suit adjusted his cufflinks and checked his phone. Gregory Pierce, 52, founder of Pierce Equity Group and newly minted majority shareholder of Reshape the Airlines, was flying quietly under the radar. He hadn't told anyone he was flying today. He hadn't even told the staff at corporate that his niece was on the same plane. He didn't need to. He wanted to observe the airline, his airline, through the eyes of a normal passenger, not as a billionaire, not as the man behind the merger about to reshape the U.S. aviation market. And yet, his phone buzzed. A single message appeared on screen. Naomi, they didn't let me sit in first class. Said I wasn't supposed to be there. I'm in economy now. It's okay. Gregory's jaw tightened. His fingers hovered over the screen. Then, slowly, he tapped a button on the armrest. A discreet red light blinked near the top of the cabin. A connection opened. The co-pilot on the other end paused when he saw the ID code blinking on his console. G. Pierce. Board override. Priority response. Back in economy, Naomi sat still, her backpack hugged tightly against her chest. She stared out the window at the runway, blinking fast to keep her eyes dry. Behind her, a couple laughed. Ahead of her, the beverage cart clattered past, but no one saw the quiet shift that had just begun. Claudia, meanwhile, walked up and down the first-class aisle, straightening headrests and offering shallow smiles. She paused at seat 2A, where an older man had now taken the spot. "Glad we got that sorted," she said to herself. "Let's keep it classy." She didn't notice the co-pilot slipping back toward the cockpit with a pale expression. She didn't hear the phone call that had just changed everything. She didn't know this wasn't just about a seat. It was about a name. A name that now owned the very wings beneath her feet. Naomi Pierce had never thought of herself as special, not because she wasn't. She was bright. Gifted, even. The kind of kid who got lost in drawing entire worlds on scraps of notebook paper. The kind of kid who read quietly during recess and remembered the name of every janitor at her school. But she never thought being special gave her any more right to things than anyone else. She just believed in fairness. She believed if you had a seat, you should be able to sit in it. That if you were polite, people would treat you with respect. She also believed, until about 30 minutes ago, that grown-ups followed rules better than kids did. Naomi shifted slightly in her cramped economy seat. Her backpack was wedged awkwardly under the seat in front of her. Her knees barely had space. Her arms were pulled in tight, avoiding contact with the man beside her, who still hadn't looked her way. She glanced down at her boarding pass again. Pierce, Naomi, 2A. First class still there, still hers. She hadn't said a word when Claudia dismissed her, hadn't raised her voice, hadn't demanded anything, just stepped aside like she was taught. Respect first, even when others don't show it. That's what Uncle Gregory always said. She remembered the morning he gave her the ticket. It was 7:13 a.m. Naomi had been up for over an hour, triple-checking her suitcase. Clothes folded neatly. Sketch pad zipped into the side pocket. Pencil bag secured. She had even packed her emergency granola bars, just in case airplane food didn't live up to expectations. In the kitchen, Gregory Pierce stood by the French press, wearing his usual soft navy sweater and dark slacks. No suit, no tie, just Gregory, as she knew him best. "You ready?" he asked without turning. "Double-checked everything," Naomi replied. "Even the charger." Gregory smiled. He always liked that about her. Thorough, quiet, but thoughtful. He turned and handed her a small envelope. It was heavy cardstock, the kind used for wedding invitations or big announcements. Naomi opened it slowly. Inside was a boarding pass, clean, crisp, and printed in gold lettering. Sky Vista Airlines, first class, seat 2A. Her eyes widened. "This is first class." Gregory leaned back against the counter and crossed his arms. "It is," she blinked. "Why?" "You're flying alone for the first time," he said. "That's a big deal. And more importantly, you deserve to be comfortable, to feel like the seat you're in reflects who you are." Naomi hesitated. "But isn't it expensive?" He gave her that calm, deliberate look he always did when she asked adult questions. "It costs money, yes, but comfort, dignity, and peace of mind? Those are things I'll never put a price tag on when it comes to you." Naomi looked down at the ticket again. She had seen first class before, of course, only from a distance, through curtains or in YouTube videos. It always looked so far away from where she usually sat. She wasn't sure she belonged there. Gregory must have seen that flicker in her expression because he crouched down to her eye level. "Naomi," he said, "you're going to walk on that plane like you've always belonged there, because you do. You belong anywhere your name is written. And your name," he tapped the ticket, "is written right on that seat." Naomi's fingers curled around the boarding pass now, remembering that moment. My name is written on that seat. She hadn't said anything when Claudia told her to step aside. Not even when the woman said, "You clearly don't belong up here." But now, sitting among the shuffle of plastic trays and armrest battles, she felt the sting rising in her chest. She didn't want revenge. She didn't want attention. She just wanted what was right. Naomi reached into her backpack, pulled out her sketch pad, and opened to a blank page. Her pencil hovered above the paper, unsure of what to draw. Her hand trembled. She tried to sketch the seat, 2A, just as she'd imagined it. A big window, smooth armrest, a glass of apple juice on the tray. But the lines came out shaky. She pressed harder, and the pencil tip snapped. She closed the pad, and then she opened her phone. One new message had arrived. "Uncle Gregory, stay calm. I'm handling it. Just focus on breathing. We'll talk soon." If there was one thing Naomi trusted in more than seat numbers, it was her uncle. Back in the cockpit, the co-pilot's eyes flicked from the overhead gauges to the secure communications console. The call had ended only 2 minutes ago, but the message was unmistakable. Gregory Pierce, yes, that Gregory Pierce, had called in using a level of clearance reserved for board-level override, the kind of code that made the FAA pause when it showed up in the system. The co-pilot turned to the captain, his voice low. "Command wants us to initiate board-level ground protocol upon landing." The captain's brows lifted. "Why?" The co-pilot swallowed. "Pierce is on board." That was all the captain needed to hear. Meanwhile, Claudia was making her way through first class, handing out warm towels with practiced grace. The kind of performance you'd expect from someone with 18 years in the air. She smiled at an older man in seat 1A, adjusted a pillow for a woman with a designer scarf, and offered wine to a pair of business travelers discussing mergers. Everything looked smooth. But it wasn't. Because somewhere in row 27 sat a little girl with a valid boarding pass, and a last name more powerful than anyone in this cabin knew. And somewhere, a man who never raised his voice was preparing to make sure everyone learned it. Naomi folded the message from Gregory into her lap, tucking her phone away. She didn't know what her uncle was doing right now. She didn't expect him to march up and demand justice. That wasn't his way. But she knew he didn't let wrong things sit too long. And she knew that when he said, "I'm handling it," he meant the whole thing. She looked down at her sketch pad again, and this time, she drew something different. Not seat 2A, not a cabin. She drew a nameplate. Claudia Heller, former lead flight attendant. Claudia Heller had worked in the airline industry for nearly 2 decades. She liked to believe she'd seen everything. The entitled business travelers, the cranky retirees, the influencers pretending not to film themselves. She prided herself on reading people before they opened their mouths. So when that little black girl walked up to the gate holding a first-class ticket, Claudia didn't hesitate. Kids like that didn't fly first class. Not alone, not dressed like that, not without someone important trailing behind them. She didn't need to scan the ticket. She didn't need to ask questions. She just knew. Now, 35,000 feet in the air, Claudia was moving through the first-class cabin like she owned it. Her posture was poised, her steps confident. She handed out hot towels, fluffed pillows, and flashed her polished professional smile. But beneath all that, she was still thinking about that kid. She probably just grabbed the wrong pass, Claudia muttered under her breath, standing in the galley with a junior flight attendant named Jill. Or maybe someone printed her ticket wrong. You'd be shocked how often they try that. sneaking up here like they belong. Jill hesitated. I mean, the ticket said 2A. Claudia rolled her eyes. People fake things all the time. Flash a barcode, act like they belong. You've got to have instincts in this job. Jill didn't reply. She had seen the interaction too. She'd watched the little girl offer her ticket politely, get dismissed, and walk away without raising her voice. No tantrum, no attitude, just a quiet walk of shame. It stuck with her, but Claudia had already moved on. Anyway, she said, adjusting her scarf, we handled it. She said it loud enough for a few passengers nearby to hear. Some ignored her. A few exchanged uncomfortable glances. Claudia didn't care. She thrived in control. And today, she believed, she'd done exactly what she was paid to do. Protect the cabin. Naomi, in 27B, didn't hear any of it. But she felt it. The weight of being pushed where you don't belong. Not because of rules, but because of what people think when they look at you. Her sketch pad rested in her lap. She had started to draw earlier, but her pencil snapped under her grip. Now she just traced invisible lines in her mind. First class layout. 1A, 1B, 2A. Her seat. Her name. She had never caused trouble in her life, never been kicked out of anything, and yet today, for the first time, she'd been made to feel like she had broken something, like she had dared too much just by sitting down. She stared out the window, jaw tight. Back in first class, Claudia stopped at seat 2A. It had been reassigned to a white businessman who barely looked up from his tablet. Claudia smiled. Can I get you another drink, sir? Scotch, neat. Right away, she said sweetly. She turned to walk back and past the woman in 1C who had been silent the whole flight. That woman, silver hair, pearl earrings, and the kind of posture that came from years in executive boardrooms, had seen everything at the gate. She hadn't said a word at the time, but she had watched. Now, she leaned slightly toward the man beside her and whispered, She kicked that little girl out of this seat. The man raised an eyebrow. Really? I saw the whole thing. Kid had the ticket in her hand. The man nodded, quietly filing that away. People in first class were watching more closely now than Claudia realized. Meanwhile, Naomi's phone buzzed quietly. Uncle Gregory, stay calm. Things are moving. Just breathe. She let the message sink in. She still didn't know what he meant. But if there was one person in the world she trusted, it was her uncle. He didn't bluff, and he didn't let things go. Naomi looked down at her sketch pad again. She flipped the page and started to draw something new. Not a seat, not a plane. A name tag. Claudia Heller, former flight attendant. In the cockpit, the co-pilot received another encrypted message through the board override line. Gregory Pierce, confirmed on board. Board level ground protocol authorized. The co-pilot turned to the captain, his voice low. This is real. The captain glanced at the readout. He's flying incognito? The co-pilot nodded. And he just pulled rank. The captain sat back in his chair. That explains everything. They both looked straight ahead, the calm of the skies suddenly feeling more fragile. Back near the galley, Claudia was prepping the landing service, collecting drink glasses and jotting down notes for the post-flight briefing. Her hand moved automatically, but something felt off. Why had the cockpit asked to reconfirm the gate mid-flight? Why was the co-pilot suddenly so formal? She shrugged it off. Maybe it was nothing, maybe it was protocol. But when the intercom clicked on and the captain's voice said, Senior Flight Attendant Claudia Heller, please report to the cockpit, the smile fell from her face. She froze for a beat. That had never happened before. In economy, Naomi looked up from her pad. Passengers around her stirred. Someone said, Did they just call a flight attendant to the cockpit? Another person whispered, That can't be good. Naomi felt something shift inside her, like the wind changing direction. She didn't know what was coming. But she knew. Claudia straightened her uniform and made her way up the aisle. Her heels clicked against the floor. Passengers glanced at her as she walked by, but no one said anything. yet. Behind her, Jill stood frozen, one hand on the curtain. She had never seen Claudia look that unsure. Claudia reached the cockpit door, knocked once, and waited. The door opened, and the co-pilot gestured her inside. The door shut behind her, and from that moment on, Claudia Heller's day, no, her career, was about to take a very sharp turn. Have you ever been judged for simply being where you were supposed to be? Let us know in the comments, because stories like Naomi's, they matter more than we think. Claudia had never been summoned to the cockpit mid-flight, not once in 18 years. She'd had captains thank her after turbulent landings, had co-pilots flirt after red eyes, even had one passenger propose to his girlfriend in her galley. But this felt different. As she stood just outside the reinforced cockpit door, something she couldn't name tightened in her chest. It wasn't fear. She didn't scare easy. But it was something. The door slid open with a soft click, and the co-pilot, a young man with calm eyes and a clenched jaw, nodded for her to step inside. "Take a seat," the captain said without turning around. Claudia slid into the jump seat behind them, smoothing her skirt, trying to keep her voice steady. "Is everything all right?" The cockpit was quiet for a moment, the hum of the engine the only reply. Then the captain turned his head slightly and said, "Claudia, how long have you been flying for Sky Vista?" She blinked. 18 years. Why? He looked at her. Really looked at her. Then leaned forward and pressed a button on the console. A secure communication line lit up. The screen above the instruments came alive with a name Claudia had seen before. Gregory Pierce. Sky Vista Board Priority Channel. The captain didn't speak. The voice on the other end did. "Captain, I assume she's with you?" "Yes, Mr. Pierce," the captain replied. There was a pause. Then, "Please inform Ms. Heller that her actions toward my niece have been noted, recorded, and will be addressed immediately upon landing. She is not to interact with any other passengers for the remainder of the flight." Claudia's breath caught. Niece. Her mind scrambled. The girl. The black girl. 2A. Naomi. She hadn't asked her last name. She hadn't checked. She had assumed. I didn't realize," she started, but the captain raised his hand to silence her. "Mr. Pierce," he said, "do you have any further instructions?" "Yes." There was no anger in Gregory's voice, just gravity. "Upon landing, hold the plane at the gate. No one disembarks until I board. This will be handled in front of the passengers." Claudia's spine stiffened. "In front of the—" "Yes." "And Claudia," he added, voice still calm, "you don't get to decide who belongs where on my airline. Not anymore." Then the line went dead. The cockpit fell silent again. The co-pilot didn't move. The captain turned slowly to look at her. "I'd return to your duties, but per instruction, you are not to interact with passengers." Claudia stood up, her legs suddenly unsteady. She opened the door and stepped out into the aisle, every footstep heavier than the last. In row 27, Naomi sat upright. She hadn't heard the call, but she had seen Claudia's face when she came out of the cockpit. Gone was the arrogance. Gone was the sharpness in her walk. The woman looked smaller, like her uniform no longer fit. Naomi glanced at her phone. Nothing new. Still, she knew. Something had shifted. She picked up her sketch pad again and began a new drawing. This time, it wasn't a seat or a name tag. It was the silhouette of a plane with a single figure standing at the top of the boarding stairs. She didn't label it, but she knew who it was. Back in first class, whispers started spreading. Passengers had seen Claudia enter the cockpit and return looking pale, rattled, and quiet. "She's not talking anymore," someone murmured. "Did you see her face? What happened in there?" The woman in 1C glanced down the aisle toward economy. "That little girl is going to change more than just seats," she said softly. Her seatmate nodded. "About time someone did." At the galley, Claudia stood motionless. Her hands shook slightly as she tried to pour water into a paper cup, but spilled it. Jill, the junior attendant, stepped forward. "Here, let me." Claudia didn't argue. She just stepped back. I didn't think she..." Jill looked at her. "You didn't ask." Claudia opened her mouth to reply, then shut it again. She returned to the jump seat and sat in silence. Meanwhile, in the private executive cabin just ahead of first class, Gregory Pierce watched the landscape pass by outside the window. His phone buzzed. "Landing confirmed. Gate 6A. Media team in position." He responded with a single word. "Proceed." He hadn't planned to reveal himself this way. He wasn't interested in grandstanding, but something about what Naomi had texted him. They said I didn't belong. It had struck a nerve. He had built companies from the ground up. He had sat in boardrooms where people whispered about how he got lucky. He had eaten in restaurants where the check was handed to someone else at the table. And now, it had happened to his niece. On his plane. Enough was enough. Back in economy, Naomi closed her sketch pad and looked straight ahead. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't smug. But in her silence, there was certainty. At the front of the plane, a young passenger near first class turned to his mom and whispered, "Is the flight attendant in trouble?" His mom looked down at her Kindle, then back at Claudia seated near the galley, stiff and quiet. "I think so, sweetie." "But why?" His mom paused, then said, "Sometimes people forget that everyone deserves to be treated with respect, and sometimes they get reminded." In row 27, Naomi stared at the overhead light. Then she whispered to herself, just barely loud enough to hear, "Uncle Gregory never forgets." The plane touched down with a smooth jolt at San Diego International, tires kissing the runway like they'd done it 1,000 times. To the passengers, it was just another landing. To Claudia Heller, it felt like the beginning of the end. She stood stiffly by the front galley, her hands folded, her eyes locked on the seatbelt sign above her. The silence around her wasn't normal. Even the flight attendants were unusually quiet, avoiding eye contact. Jill hadn't said a word since they began descent. First class didn't erupt into the usual rustling of coats and laptop bags. There were no zippers, no impatient clicks of carry-ons being dragged from overhead compartments. Only the hum of the engine and the heaviness in the air. Seatbelt sign off. And yet, no chime for disembark. No, "Thank you for flying Sky Vista." Claudia stepped forward, clearing her throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for..." Before she could finish, the captain's voice cut in overhead. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. The doors will not open just yet. We are awaiting a special boarding request from our executive team. Your patience is appreciated." A pause, then silence, and a wave of murmurs rippled through the cabin. A boarding request? What does that mean? Executive team? Is something wrong? From her seat in 1C, the silver-haired woman who had watched everything unfold glanced toward the galley, then toward Claudia. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "She knows what it means," she whispered to her seatmate. Claudia stood frozen, heart pounding. She had hoped, somehow, that this wouldn't go public, that Mr. Pierce would handle it discreetly, behind closed doors. But now, the entire cabin was being held for him. In row 27, Naomi looked up slowly. She didn't say a word, but her fingers stopped moving across her sketch pad. She could feel it. Her uncle was here. Outside the aircraft, a black SUV pulled up beside Gate 6A, followed by 2 unmarked sedans. There were no flashing lights, no loud voices, just a man in a dark suit stepping out with a calm, steady presence that made people look twice. Gregory Pierce wasn't the kind of man you recognized on billboards, but if you worked in aviation, mergers, or finance, you knew him. And now he was walking up the jet bridge, flanked by 2 Sky Vista executives and a board attorney. No press, no cameras, just purpose. Inside the aircraft, the mood was shifting. First-class passengers looked around, sensing something serious was about to happen. Row 27 leaned forward slightly, whispering among themselves. One man in 10B muttered, "This feels different." Another passenger in 14A looked out the window. "There's someone coming up the bridge." Then the door opened. Soft at first, just a hiss of the cabin pressure equalizing. And Gregory Pierce stepped inside. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't wave his hands. He just walked, steady and silent, all the way to the front of the cabin. Passengers turned in their seats to follow him with their eyes. A few gasped quietly, recognizing him. Claudia's face had gone ghost white. Gregory didn't stop at the cockpit. He stopped in the aisle, turned toward first class, and spoke with the clarity of a man used to boardrooms, not cabins. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the delay. I won't take much of your time. I simply have something to correct, publicly." The entire plane fell silent. You could hear someone's watch beep. Then Gregory turned to Claudia and said, loud enough for economy to hear, "Ms. Heller, I am Gregory Pierce. I acquired 52% of SkyVista Airlines last quarter. That means, as of last month, I'm your employer." Claudia opened her mouth, but nothing came out. He continued, "Yesterday, I finalized a merger to fold SkyVista into a 3-airline alliance that controls nearly a third of U.S. air travel. We plan to bring consistency, dignity, and equity back to the passenger experience." A beat. Then, without looking away, "This morning, you removed a 10-year-old black girl from her assigned seat in first class. You dismissed her ticket. You assumed she didn't belong." The cabin was dead still. "What you didn't know is, that girl is my niece." A woman in 2C gasped. A man in economy whispered, "No way." Naomi's hands gently folded the corner of her sketch pad. "You didn't check her name. You didn't check the record. You didn't ask. You assumed. You embarrassed her. You humiliated her. And now, I'm here to restore the dignity you tried to take." Gregory turned slightly, his voice never rising, but every word landed like a stone. "Effective immediately, Ms. Heller. You are relieved of your duties at SkyVista." Claudia staggered back a step. "Sir, I didn't know." He cut her off, calm, measured. "You didn't care to know. That's worse." He gestured to the executive behind him. "You may escort her off the aircraft now." The executive nodded and stepped forward. Claudia's eyes scanned the plane, looking for someone, anyone, to come to her defense. No one did. Not a single hand lifted, not a single voice spoke. She gathered her things in silence. As she passed row 27, Naomi looked at her, calm, neutral, no anger, no triumph, just stillness. Claudia didn't meet her eyes. She stepped off the plane. Gone. Gregory stood still for a moment longer, then addressed the passengers again. "To everyone on board, I thank you for your patience. I understand delays are frustrating, but let me be clear. This delay wasn't about one girl or one seat. It was about all the times people have been told they don't belong. That ends here." He turned toward the back of the plane. "Naomi." She stood up slowly. Gregory smiled, soft, not performative. "Come on up." She walked up the aisle. Passengers moved aside gently, respectfully. She stopped beside her uncle, who placed a hand on her shoulder. "This is the only person on this plane I'm truly here for today," he said. "She had a seat, and she'll take it." He looked toward seat 2A. Naomi looked at it, then at her uncle, and then shook her head. "Can I sit next to you instead?" Gregory chuckled, nodded, and led her to the private cabin just past first class. The rest of the passengers stayed quiet as she passed, but the look in their eyes had changed. Respect, admiration, and something deeper. As the plane doors reopened and passengers began disembarking, a man in 14A turned to the woman beside him. "Did that really just happen?" She nodded. "It did." "And that was the owner?" "No," she said with a smile. "That was her uncle." By the time the last passenger stepped off the plane, Word had already started to spread. No one yelled, no one filmed it. But somehow, everyone knew. As airport staff helped passengers exit Gate 6A, whispers began floating like smoke through the terminal. Did you hear what happened on that Sky Vista flight? Some girl got kicked out of first class. Turned out her uncle owns the airline. They say he fired the flight attendant right there before anyone could leave. It's all over the executive Slack boards already. At the arrival screen, 3 agents paused and stared at flight SV245 from Boston. Is that the one? That's the flight, the youngest said, eyes wide. Gate 6A. From the other side of the glass wall, Naomi walked beside her uncle, calm, quiet, backpack on her shoulder, sketchpad tucked under one arm. She didn't wave, didn't smile, but her presence changed the temperature of the room. In the executive boardroom 27 floors above Sky Vista's West Coast office, an emergency meeting had been called. Gregory Pierce hadn't even left the airport. He'd walked straight from the plane to the airline's private terminal suite and requested every department head on the West Coast division to log in immediately. Legal, HR, PR operations. At 3:41 p.m., the call began. Let's be clear, Gregory said into the screen, sleeves rolled to his forearms. This isn't about a child being treated unfairly. This is about our culture. The room was dead silent. He continued. A passenger holding a valid first-class ticket was removed because of someone else's assumptions. No questions asked. No procedures followed. Someone from HR unmuted. Sir, we've already started preparing a performance review. Gregory raised a hand. Not enough. This isn't about one person. This is about how many people watched it happen and didn't speak up. Legal chimed in. We've never had anything like this escalate at the gate before. It didn't escalate, Gregory replied. It wasn't allowed to escalate. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She just accepted it. And that's what's worse. The PR director shifted in her seat. We're starting to get media requests. Local stations. One national blog already picked up a version. Gregory nodded once. Good. We won't run from it. A few heads snapped up. He leaned forward. In 24 hours, I want the following implemented. Public statement from Sky Vista accepting full responsibility. No deflection. Mandatory retraining for all customer-facing roles on Dignity First protocols. Introduction of a Dignity Check scorecard. Every flight, every crew, every time. Anonymous passenger reporting, reviewed by an external committee. Suspend discretionary upgrades until implicit bias protocols are in place. Review every complaint of passenger profiling in the last 2 years. All of them. Silence. Then someone on the operations team quietly asked, Is this in response to what happened to your niece? Gregory looked directly at the screen. No, this is in response to what happened to every passenger like her who didn't have someone waiting at the gate. The screen went still. Then the legal lead said, almost in awe, Sir, this could change the industry. Gregory leaned back, voice quiet. That's the point. Outside the boardroom, Naomi sat on a bench in the corner of the private terminal lounge, her backpack beside her, legs swinging off the edge just slightly. She wasn't sure how she felt. She hadn't asked for any of this. She hadn't wanted anyone fired, but she had wanted someone, anyone, to say, You were right to be in that seat. She looked down at her sketch pad, flipping to a new page. This time she drew something simple. 2 airplane seats, side by side. One labeled, For You. The other, For anyone who ever got told you don't belong. Back inside the terminal, passengers from the flight were still talking. A young mother in her 30s texted her sister, You will not believe what I just witnessed. Some little black girl got kicked out of her seat. Her uncle shows up. Turns out he owns the whole damn airline. Fired the flight attendant on the plane. The response came seconds later. Wait, what? Is this real? Across the airport, a Sky Vista regional manager got a ping from his supervisor. We're pausing all discretionary flight attendant promotions until we finish this audit. That incident at Gate 6A, CEO-level directive. It's going viral. His eyes widened. Viral? He opened his app. Already, a Reddit thread had 22,000 upvotes. Flight attendant blocks little girl from first class. Turns out she's the boss's niece. Somewhere in a hotel room in Chicago, Claudia Heller sat alone, her suitcase by the door, a printed letter in her hand. Immediate suspension pending review. She read it again and again. No phone calls had come in. No one had defended her. No one had asked her what she thought Naomi's last name was. And maybe that was the point. She folded the letter and looked out the window. For the first time in years, she wondered how many people like Naomi she had quietly redirected, dismissed, or ignored, and how many of them just went quietly back to row 27. Back at the terminal, Naomi looked up as Gregory stepped into the lounge. "Hey, kid," he said gently. She gave a small smile. "Are you in trouble?" Gregory laughed. "Hardly. People are talking about it. They'll talk for a while," he said, sitting beside her. "Then they'll start watching what we do next." Naomi paused. "You didn't have to fire her." Gregory nodded. "No, but I had to make sure no one else ever treats you, or someone like you, that way again." Naomi looked at him. "Is it really going to change?" Gregory thought for a moment, then said calmly, "One flight doesn't change the sky, but it can change how people look up." She liked that. So she wrote it down on her sketch pad, and underneath it, one word: hope. By the next morning, what happened on Flight SV245 wasn't just a story. It was a movement. Naomi didn't even have a public social media account. She didn't post about the incident. She didn't rant, didn't cry on camera, didn't tag anyone. But someone else did. A passenger from first class, who had quietly filmed the moment Gregory Pierce stood in the aisle and removed Claudia from duty, uploaded a 47-second clip to TikTok with the caption, "She kicked out a little black girl from first class. Turns out that girl's uncle owns the airline. He showed up. She's gone. This is justice." In less than 12 hours, it hit 6 million views. Morning anchors picked it up. National radio shows asked, "What does dignity mean in travel?" An op-ed in the Washington Post titled, "Naomi's seat wasn't a luxury, it was her right." On LinkedIn, airline executives shared posts with phrases like corporate accountability, bias in customer service, and dignity first leadership. And Gregory? He didn't post a thing. But his team quietly launched a new landing page on SkyVista's website with just 6 words. "We saw it. We're changing it." Underneath was a list of policy updates and a press contact. They didn't name Naomi. They didn't need to. Meanwhile, Naomi sat at her uncle's kitchen counter in Boston, slowly stirring honey into her tea. She hadn't gone back to school yet. Not because she was afraid. She just didn't feel like pretending nothing had happened. Her sketch pad sat open beside her. She wasn't drawing today. She was just watching. "Do you want to see what they're saying?" Gregory asked gently, holding up his phone. Naomi shook her head. "Are you sure?" She looked up at him. "What good would it do?" Gregory gave a small smile. "Some of it might make you feel less alone." Naomi took a sip of her tea. "I didn't feel alone." He paused, then nodded. Later that day, Gregory joined a virtual town hall with 400+ SkyVista employees. The tension in the video call was obvious. Some wore concern on their faces, others confusion, even anger. They'd read the memos, they'd seen the headlines. They didn't know what would happen next. Gregory didn't waste time. "This isn't punishment. This is reform." What happened on Flight 245 was preventable, not because of better rules, but because of better reflexes. We don't need more procedures. We need more people who stop and ask, "Am I treating this person fairly?" Some of you are wondering why this is such a big deal. Some of you are thinking, it's just a seat. But seats aren't just cushions and tray tables. They're symbols. And when you move someone out of their seat when they were supposed to be there, You send a message that they don't belong. He let that hang in the air. From now on, we check names. But more importantly, we check ourselves. In the days that followed, the impact deepened. Sky Vista's call centers began logging 3x the usual number of calls, not complaints, but support. Parents called in to say thank you. Teachers wrote emails about using the video in class to talk about fairness. Frequent flyers requested to be part of the new Passenger Equity Panel. One email simply read, "I've been Naomi. At 40 years old, I'm still Naomi. Thank you for seeing us." Claudia, meanwhile, had gone dark. Her name trended briefly, then disappeared. No interviews, no public apologies, no explanations. Gregory had offered no further comment on her employment status, but inside the airline, everyone knew. The lesson wasn't about Claudia, it was about culture. One morning, Naomi found a package at the front door. Inside was a hardcover notebook, black leather, gold-trimmed edges, and a note in handwriting she didn't recognize. "One day, you'll draw what happened. Not for them, for you. Keep going." A flight attendant who's trying to be better. Naomi traced the edge of the paper with her finger, then picked up her pencil. At school the following week, her teacher asked if she'd like to share about her trip. Naomi simply said, "Sometimes you don't get to sit where you're supposed to, but if you stay quiet long enough, someone might stand up without you even asking." The classroom went still. No one said a word, but her classmates listened harder for the rest of the day. Back at Sky Vista, Gregory met with board members behind closed doors. One of them, an older executive in a crisp suit, folded his hands and asked, "You could have handled this privately. Why did you make it public?" Gregory replied, "Because it wasn't just a mistake. It was a message, and I needed to send one back. Quiet doesn't work anymore, but dignity still does." 2 weeks later, the new Sky Vista Dignity Score system launched. Every flight now included a post-trip survey with one core question. Did you feel like you were treated as if you belonged? Passengers could respond anonymously. Scores were reviewed weekly. Bonuses were tied to performance. Gregory didn't care if people called it performative. He cared if someone like Naomi never had to be told, "You don't belong here," again. That Sunday, Naomi and Gregory flew again. Not in first class, not in any special seat. Just side by side, window and middle. As the plane leveled off at cruising altitude, a flight attendant passed by and paused. She knelt down gently, placed a ginger ale and a cookie on Naomi's tray, and said softly, "There's no seat number in the sky, just stories. And yours made me want to do better." Naomi looked at her, surprised, then smiled. It was small, but real. The press room inside the Sky Vista headquarters wasn't built for breaking news. It was quiet, wood-paneled, modest. A few dozen chairs, a single row of flags. No flashy screens, no dramatic lighting. But on this particular morning, the room was packed. Reporters, industry analysts, shareholder reps, and airline employees filled every seat. The energy in the room was electric, tense, curious, and just a little bit anxious. Everyone had read the headlines. Everyone had seen the clip. Everyone was waiting to hear from the man at the center of it all. And at 9 a.m. sharp, Gregory Pierce walked to the podium. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just looked out over the crowd and began, steady and clear. "This morning, I'm announcing a formal merger between Sky Vista Airlines and 2 additional regional carriers under Pierce Aviation Holdings. This merger gives us control of 31% of domestic air traffic across 118 U.S. airports." Gasps rippled through the room. This wasn't just a corporate restructuring. This was a power shift. Gregory continued, "But I'm not here today just to talk about routes and revenue. I'm here to talk about what that power is going to be used for. Because having leverage in this industry is only worth something if we use it to fix what's broken. He paused, letting the weight of that sentence land. You've all seen the video. You've read the statements. What happened on Flight SV245 wasn't a one-time mistake. It was a reflection of a larger problem, one that affects thousands of travelers every single day. We've trained our people to manage passengers, but we forgot to train them to respect people. Silence filled the room. Gregory went on. That ends now. Starting next quarter, all partner airlines under our alliance will adopt a unified dignity protocol. Training, review systems, and accountability measures across every level of staff. If you wear our badge, you respect every human being who walks onto our aircraft. No exceptions. Back at home, Naomi sat cross-legged on the couch, watching the live stream on her iPad. She didn't know most of the business terms Gregory used, but she understood his tone. He wasn't just making rules, he was drawing a line. Her uncle never shouted, but when he spoke like this, people listened. Even through the screen, she could feel it. In the press room, a reporter finally raised a hand. Mr. Pierce, you've made this a very personal campaign. Was that intentional? Gregory nodded. Very. Another reporter asked, and your niece, has she spoken publicly about it? He shook his head. She didn't need to. She already said everything when she stood there and said nothing. Audience interaction, natural, Hmong, and fitting tone of this chapter. Have you ever had a moment where staying silent said more than words ever could? Let us know below, because sometimes the most powerful stories don't come from those who yell the loudest. The press conference continued for 45 minutes. Questions about restructuring, fleet changes, training programs, pilot unions. Gregory answered them all, measured, calm, composed. But no answer landed harder than the last one. A young journalist stood and asked, "What does your niece think of all this, of being the face of this change?" Gregory looked directly into the camera and smiled for the first time that morning. She doesn't want to be a face. She just wanted her seat. Later that afternoon, Naomi sat by the window in her room, watching planes cross the sky. She didn't understand the full scale of what her uncle had just done, but she could feel the difference. It was in the texts from her classmates, the quiet nod from her bus driver, the way a teacher paused when she called her name, then smiled with something a little more like respect. It was subtle, but real. Meanwhile, deep inside a Sky Vista conference room, a group of senior managers reviewed a growing list of former complaints. Each file was a name. Each name was a story. Some were angry. Some were quiet. Some sounded a lot like Naomi's. One manager closed the folder in her hands and whispered, "How many times did this happen before someone had an uncle in the boardroom?" No one answered, but they all knew the truth. That night, Gregory stood in front of the window in his study, nursing a cup of tea. His phone buzzed. A text from a rival airline CEO. "Your move just shook the whole damn industry. We'll have to keep up." Gregory replied simply, "Good. Then we're getting somewhere." Before bed, Naomi placed her sketch pad on her nightstand. On the last page, she had written something new, big, bold letters. "I didn't move. The world did." When Gregory Pierce spoke, boardrooms listened. But when his policies started reshaping revenue streams, rival airlines started sweating. Just 3 days after his press conference, Sky Vista's stock jumped 12. Analysts on Bloomberg called it a bet on ethics as competitive strategy. MarketWatch used the headline, "Morality Moves Markets, How Pierce Turned a Scandal into Dominance." But behind the scenes, things weren't so calm. In a private call between 3 CEOs of rival domestic carriers, the conversation was blunt. If he gets this dignity protocol adopted as a new passenger standard, we're looking at a shift in the entire pricing model. It's not just marketing. He's turning respect into leverage. We need to stop this before it sets a new bar we can't afford. And in that moment, the war lines quietly formed. This wasn't about a little girl anymore. This was about who controls the future of commercial flight. Meanwhile, Gregory was calm, not relaxed, just prepared. He knew the pushback would come. He had expected it, and he had already drafted his response. At 5 a.m. the next morning, Gregory sat with his small operations team in a secure conference suite at Logan Airport, where he presented what he called Phase 2. There were no graphs, no slogans, just one slide, black screen, white text, industry standard or industry obsolete. The team leaned in. Gregory spoke plainly. "We're not asking the rest of the industry to catch up. We're giving them a choice: match the standard or get left behind. Our dignity protocol isn't a feature, it's a filter. If your culture can't pass it, you don't fly with us." One executive raised a hand. "What about alliances? Shared code agreements?" Gregory nodded. "Those are being renegotiated. No more silent partners with noisy problems." Silence filled the room. They all understood what he meant. Sky Vista wasn't trying to fit into the industry. It was about to force the industry to fit around it. Across the country, news outlets started comparing Sky Vista's policy rollout to seatbelt laws in the 1980s. Controversial at first, then standard, then required. In a regional airline HQ in Texas, a mid-level marketing VP slammed her laptop shut after reading the latest data. "His sentiment numbers are off the charts. People aren't just flying with them, they're buying in." Her boss didn't even look up. That's what happens when you get it right before it becomes regulation. Back in Boston, Naomi was finishing a quiet lunch with her uncle on the rooftop garden of his building. She hadn't said much that day, just sat, sketched, watched the planes pass. But Gregory noticed something in her silence. She wasn't anxious anymore. She was focused. "What you drawing?" he asked gently. She turned the pad around. A cabin layout, but not just any layout. Each seat had a label, not names, not numbers, but intentions. "Belongs here. Welcome. Earned. Still learning." Gregory raised an eyebrow. "This for a story?" Naomi smiled. "Maybe." That night, Gregory received an invitation from a major network to appear on national television. Prime time. He declined. Instead, he sent a video statement. 2 minutes long, black backdrop, no music. This story was never about punishment. It's about policy. When you tell someone they don't belong, you don't just risk a lawsuit, you risk your legacy. And when you tell them, quietly with your actions, that they do belong, you rewrite the rules for everyone watching. Back at school, Naomi had returned to a version of normal, or at least a new version of it. People stared less, they whispered less, but they still looked. And this time, Naomi looked back. She didn't shrink. She didn't smile to make them more comfortable. She just met their gaze, even, calm, unapologetic. She had learned something new. Sometimes silence isn't weakness, it's memory. And some people need to remember. Inside Sky Vista HQ, an internal poll showed something no one expected. 94% of employees said the dignity protocol made them feel more proud to wear the uniform. One HR executive, reading the data, said aloud, "It's not just passengers he's restoring. It's us." In the shadows, rival airlines began drafting counter-campaigns. Some tried humor. Others leaned into tradition, but none could escape the truth. They had been reactive. Gregory had been proactive, and in an industry where delays cost millions, he'd left them behind on the runway. Naomi closed her sketchpad that evening and looked out at the city. Gregory joined her, 2 mugs of cocoa in hand. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. "Better than okay?" He smiled. "Good, because it's not over yet." Naomi looked at him curious. He sipped the cocoa and added, "We've changed the rules. Next, we're changing the map." Gregory Pierce never rushed a rollout. He knew how power worked, not just when you used it, but when you waited. Long enough for the world to realize it needed you to act. And now, Weeks after the incident on flight SV-245, it was time for the next move. It started with a map. On a Monday morning in a secure glass conference room, Gregory laid out a series of documents across a walnut table. Each sheet marked a major regional airport in red. Some were well known: Chicago Midway, Atlanta Hartsfield, Denver International. Others were quieter hubs: Sacramento, El Paso, Omaha. But what connected them all was a small note at the bottom of each page. Pending Sky Vista Alliance Gate Transfer, Phase 1. "Gentlemen," Gregory said to his internal expansion team, "we're not just rebranding routes, we're rewiring access." He tapped the center of the table. "In 90 days, we'll control priority terminals in 41 airports across the country. These aren't just gates, they're experiences. Every one of them will reflect what we stand for: access, dignity, and no more whispered bias behind polished smiles." Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Sky Vista's integration team finalized agreements with 3 mid-size regional carriers, bringing their pilot crews, customer service training, and route networks under Pierce Aviation's ethical operations umbrella. This wasn't a merger. It was a reboot. In the industry, shockwaves grew louder. An internal memo leaked from a major airline competitor reading, "Sky Vista is no longer a competitor. It's a standard. If we don't match tone for tone, policy for policy, we risk being labeled the problem." Their executive VP scribbled one note at the bottom of the memo: "We need our own Naomi moment, or we're done." But Gregory wasn't interested in letting the market catch up. He wanted to shift the expectation itself. At a private board presentation, he said, "We're not fighting over airfare anymore. We're fighting over who gets to define what good looks like. Let them chase PR. We'll build practices." While the corporate world watched, Naomi Pierce went back to school. She walked hallways that now felt less heavy. Fewer whispers, fewer stares, just small nods, quiet signs of respect. One afternoon, her history teacher pulled her aside. "I'm teaching a new ethics module next month," she said. "Would you want to help?" Naomi blinked. "Help how?" "Well," the teacher smiled, "you're living it." That evening, Gregory handed Naomi a sealed envelope across the dinner table. She opened it slowly. Inside, a personal letterhead from the Department of Transportation. "Dear Miss Naomi Pierce, you are invited to serve as a youth advisor on our National Passenger Experience Council." Her eyes widened. "I'm not a public speaker." Gregory smiled. "You don't have to speak. Just be in the room." Elsewhere, Sky Vista launched a new program, Dignity Flight Certification. To fly on certain routes under their new alliance, a carrier's entire staff, from check-in to tarmac crew, had to complete a certification based on nonverbal bias recognition, passenger escalation empathy, implicit assumption checkpoints, power awareness in uniformed roles. Most airlines laughed, at first. But then media picked up a story from Louisville. A passenger denied boarding for dress code violation had her case reopened after it was flagged through Sky Vista's independent dignity audit. The clip made headlines. The airline she flew with didn't. But Sky Vista's policy? Once again, trending. Naomi, meanwhile, returned to drawing. But now, her sketches were different. Not cabins or seats, but people. Smiles. Shoulders relaxed. Moments where someone let someone else in, without judgment. She wasn't drawing to escape anymore. She was drawing to remember. One morning, she received a letter in the mail. Plain white envelope, no return address. Inside was a photo of her on the plane, seated quietly in row 27, sketchpad open. Someone had taken it from a few rows back. On the back of the photo, handwritten, "I saw you, and next time I see someone being treated the way you were, I won't stay quiet." No signature, no social handle, just the truth, and that was enough. At a regional aviation conference in Seattle, A young executive stood at the mic and asked a panel of legacy airline CEOs, "Will you be adopting the Dignity Score system like SkyVista?" The panel shifted. Someone coughed. One CEO forced a smile and said, "We're evaluating similar tools." But the room wasn't fooled, and neither were the passengers listening on live stream. Because the rules had changed, and Naomi's story had changed them. As for Gregory, he ended his week at a private strategy dinner with 2 international airline chairmen. They'd flown in to explore compatibility, which, in business speak, meant, "We're scared you'll force us to catch up." Gregory didn't offer them a pitch. He just laid down 2 pieces of paper. One read, "Alliance Entry Requirements." The other, a photo of Naomi, boarding pass in hand, smile quiet, eyes steady. And the caption Gregory had personally written at the bottom, "She didn't raise her voice, she just didn't move." And the system shifted around her. Washington, D.C. 8:04 a.m. A soft spring breeze stirred the flag outside the Department of Transportation building, the sunlight catching on the brass eagle above the door. Inside, in a formal room lined with microphones, nameplates, and pitchers of water, Naomi Pierce sat quietly at the end of a long, curved table. Her nameplate read, "Naomi Pierce, Youth Advisor, National Passenger Experience Council." She hadn't asked for this seat, but it was hers now, and this time, no one could take it from her. Gregory had flown in with her the night before, but he didn't join the session. He knew better. This wasn't his moment. It was hers. Across from Naomi sat a mix of officials, transportation administrators, airline execs, and policymakers from different states. They weren't used to silence in this room, but Naomi didn't fill space with words. She waited, listened, watched, until the chairwoman finally said, "Naomi, would you like to begin with any opening thoughts?" The cameras in the room tilted slightly toward her. She didn't panic. She didn't shrink. She just leaned forward and said clearly, "I was told I didn't belong in a seat that already had my name on it. No one checked, no one asked. They just saw me and decided. So, I want to start today by asking, how many other passengers never speak up? And how many of us are okay with that?" Silence. Then one of the officials whispered, just loud enough to catch on mic, "She's not here to be a symbol. She's here to make them listen." After the opening remarks, Naomi sat back as the room launched into discussion. Passenger complaints, delayed responses, confusing boarding group policies. She took notes, not because she had to, but because she was paying attention. At one point, a regional airline rep mentioned, "We're doing the best we can with current staffing." Naomi looked up and said calmly, "Doing your best isn't always enough. Sometimes, people get hurt anyway." By the time the session ended, she had only spoken 4 more times, but each time, the room paused. It wasn't how much she said, it was how little she wasted. Outside the building, press waited, but she didn't stop for questions. She stepped into the back of the car where Gregory was waiting. "How'd it go?" he asked gently. Naomi shrugged. "I think I made them uncomfortable." Gregory smiled. "Good." Later that night, a national columnist published a story with a headline, "A girl who never asked to speak, but made the whole room go quiet." The article included a quote from an unnamed council member. "She reminded us what all this is supposed to be about. Not policy, not politics, people, dignity, seats with names." While Naomi's voice echoed through DC boardrooms across the Atlantic, Gregory's strategy was entering its next phase. A quiet partnership was formalized with 2 European carriers and 1 major Canadian airline, all agreeing to adopt SkyVista's Dignity Protocol as a requirement for alliance inclusion. With that, Gregory's influence officially crossed continental lines. The quiet revolution had gone global. On social media, a new wave of posts began surfacing under the hashtag #CheckTheName. A young man uploaded a video of being upgraded to first class and being questioned, until the gate agent checked his name. A flight attendant posted a handwritten thank you note from a teen who was seated next to her mom after a quiet conversation at the gate. A pilot shared a photo of his daughter in uniform with the caption, "I trained her to fly, she trained me to see." Naomi didn't post anything, but the stories came to her anyway. Letters from passengers, emails from flight attendants. One even arrived from a pilot in Qatar, all thanking her for not yelling, for not turning it into a fight, but instead forcing the world to look inward. One afternoon, her phone buzzed with a message from Jill, the young flight attendant who had watched it all unfold that day. "Hey Naomi, I just finished the new training modules. They made us review your story." I cried. "Thank you for holding your seat. I promise I'll never forget you did." Naomi stared at the message for a long time, then quietly replied, "You saw it. That's all I ever needed." That week, Gregory hosted a private dinner in Boston with the new Global Alliance leadership team. No media, no PR, just 8 people who now controlled the ethical infrastructure of air travel across 4 continents. Gregory stood and raised a glass. "We didn't create new skies. We just made sure the old ones have new rules." As they toasted, Naomi sat in her room, sketching quietly. This time, she drew something new. A row of airplane seats, but each one had a symbol above it. Not names, not ranks, just a single word on each: human. It had been 87 days since flight SV-245. Naomi knew that because she'd marked each one in the corner of her sketchpad, not out of obsession, but as a quiet reminder of how far things had come. Now, she was back at Boston Logan. Same airport, same terminal, same gate. Gate 12B, her backpack felt a little heavier today. Not because of anything inside, just the weight of what this place meant. This was where she had once been told, politely, firmly, and without question, that she didn't belong. Now, she belonged to the system that rewrote the response. The check-in line moved quickly. The new attendants wore navy and gray uniforms with small pins that read, "Certified Dignity Protocol 1.0." As Naomi approached the counter, the agent, a tall man with calm eyes and kind energy, glanced at her ticket, then looked up and smiled warmly. "Naomi Pierce?" She nodded. He didn't ask any questions. He just said, "Welcome back." The walk toward first class felt surreal, not because it was luxurious, but because nothing stopped her. No pause, no glance, no assumption. Just the sound of her shoes on the jet bridge and the gentle, rhythmic music inside the aircraft. She placed her backpack in the overhead, took her seat, 2A again, and exhaled slowly. Then she opened her sketchpad. Just as she did, she noticed something unfolding across the aisle. A young South Asian woman, maybe early 20s, stood by the front row, holding a valid first-class boarding pass. The flight attendant, a woman in her 50s with soft eyes and a direct voice, glanced at the pass. She hesitated for half a second, then she said, "Give me just a moment," and stepped into the galley. Naomi's posture didn't shift. She just watched. The pause was familiar. The woman returned with another attendant, younger, clipboard in hand. They double-checked the manifest. Then, quietly, respectfully, the older flight attendant stepped forward, met the passenger's eyes, and said, "Apologies. This seat is yours. We just had to verify something on our end." Her voice was calm, not defensive, not dismissive. She added softly, "We don't assume anymore. We ask. Thank you for your patience." The young woman nodded, smiled slightly, and sat down. No fuss, no whispers, just grace. Naomi looked down at her sketchpad. She turned to a blank page, then drew 2 outlines of passengers, standing, uncertain, with a caption between them. "Not every wrong moment needs to be a fight. Some just need someone willing to pause and correct." As the plane took off, the sun caught the wing just right, casting a golden stripe across Naomi's seat. She looked out the window, silent, not because she had nothing to say, but because the silence finally felt earned. This was the first time she had flown since the hearing, the first time she'd returned to the beginning. But it no longer felt like a wound. It felt like a circle, quietly closed. Somewhere behind her, a passenger sneezed. The older flight attendant smiled and handed over a tissue, a small gesture, but Naomi noticed. Because it was the kind of thing you don't always see unless you've once been unseen. As the plane leveled out, a man seated in 3C leaned slightly into the aisle and caught the attendant's attention. "Hey," he said quietly, "I saw what happened back there. You handled it well." The attendant smiled. "That's the training." He raised an eyebrow. "New?" She nodded. "New and overdue." Then she turned to Naomi, not because she knew who she was, but because the cabin had shifted in tone, and she could feel it. "Would you like anything to drink, miss?" Naomi looked up and smiled. "Water's fine, thank you." Simple, easy, no hesitation, and in that, there was victory. As she leaned back in her seat, Naomi glanced down at the boarding pass still tucked into the seat pocket. 2A, Naomi Pierce. Same seat, same name. But this time, the world had adjusted to fit the truth, not the other way around. Have you ever returned to a place where you were once made to feel small, but this time stood taller just by being you? Let us know in the comments, because sometimes the greatest justice isn't loud. It's just walking back in and not needing anyone's permission to belong.